Welcome, friends. Today, I want to talk about the art of responding. If you are new here, I do this series called Ask This Filipino Therapist, and I'm Roanne. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Now, what is this art of responding? We often see and hear posts in social media on things you should do, say, or don't say. And so to me, that's the art of delivery. And if you focus on how someone else should be delivering their response, how they would supposedly be greeting you appropriately, in the real world, that will be something difficult to control because we cannot control what other people say, what they do. We can only hope that they would deliver their message where it's appropriate or feels good to us. But that's really an ideal world. And so I wanted to talk about the lost art of responding. And if you're listening, you know that I focus on the Filipinos, Filipinx, Filipino American context, relationships, and especially I'm recording this video during the holiday season. But whether or not you're watching it during the holiday season or sometime in May or June, I'm hoping that you get something out of this video. Before I share the art of responding, I think it's worth sharing that culture does shape the way we perceive our interaction with others. So there's a book called Culture Map, and I would link it below. And it's a researcher who studied a lot of cross-culture interactions. And Filipinos in general are very relationship based, and Americans in general, of course, when we're talking about research and studies, it's always in general. It's really impossible to talk about individual differences. So it's usually looking for patterns and trends and generalizations, if you will. Now, Americans in general are task oriented. And as far as asking questions, there is a difference with more quote unquote traditional Filipinos in the manner of asking compared to Americans, or even if you're Filipino but you were born and raised in the Americas. And here's a difference. So when we talk about relationship base, a Filipino would ask a question. So again, this is in general, not always to be responded to as to the information, but to connect. There is a language that we say, and scholars in the Philippines would say, that the Filipino is always checking to see if the person is ibang tao, other person, in the out group, or hindi ibang tao. One way that the Filipino gauge that is by asking questions. And I remember, because I have done hundreds of visits in my previous work in Filipinx homes. And one time when I was doing a presentation with nurses talking about the Filipino culture, a nurse asked me, non-Filipino, how do I know, like if I'm establishing rapport? And one way to know that, I remember responding many years ago, is when they start asking you personal questions. And usually the Filipino is not, of course, the juicy information, everybody enjoys that, right? The chismis. But most of the time, if you look behind the context, trying to gauge if the person is hindi ibang tao, not the other, can they jam with me? And for me, because I've done hundreds of visits, there's like many times that Filipino homes, Filipinos have asked me, where do you live? Anak, saan ka nakatira? And with the art of responding, which I'm talking about now, I have never given my address because I understood it was they're asking to connect. Now, the difference with the American culture is because we're task oriented, is that when we ask a question, there's a purpose for asking it. We do want the response to the question. And often, when you see from this Western lens, the Filipino American might be offended because when someone is asking, they see it as they needing to respond. And I want to share with you that more often than not, you could actually get away with the art of responding, which I'll talk about in a moment. But it's important just to know that there's a difference in the cultural reasoning for asking questions. Now, are there tactless titas and titos? Yes. Or ill intent? Yes, of course. Those are pretty evident, and of course, take the healthy boundary setting that you need to take. But in general, titas who prepared for potluck, and when they open the door to greet you, they're happy to see you. And the goal, their intent is really not to offend, but to make a connection. Now, the way you take it based on their delivery is what makes or break the interaction. So here's the art of responding and also the art of preparing. So some of my recommendations would be something you may not often hear, but since I have done a lot of home visits, and this is just not an example for me because I'm weary with giving my own personal example if I know it's not representative of a particular sample group. So I guess I'm representing with a sample group of some immigrants who are able to have this art of responding. First, it's very important to, of course, learn to self-regulate, soothe yourself, to not enter spaces with a shield. Now, if you have received so many messages already from social media, it's really what you are looking for, you are likely to find. So if you enter spaces with a shield, guess what? You might see many spears there. So be mindful of that. So couple of ways, or maybe 3 ways, is to use humor. So for instance, when someone asks me, "Anak, saan ka ba nakatira? Where do you live?" I might respond with humor. "Bakit pupuntahan niyo ako, Tahay? Or you'll come and visit me?" "Naku, wag na, napakalayo. It's too far. Don't worry about it." And I actually don't have to even respond to the actual question. So using humor. Next one, even using some sarcasm, right? If someone asks you, "Oh, wala ka pang anak?" So sarcasm would be like, "Hayaan mo bukas, tita. Gusto mo bukas?" It's like, translating that, it's like, "Okay, oh, you want me to have a baby tomorrow, come visit me." And that ends usually the conversation. Now, if it's super irritating for you, I could also understand. This is a 2-way adjusting, not just the more traditional Filipino and just the Filipino American. If we also know that some greetings are offensive to the other, of course we want to learn from each other and of course we want to be more culturally ambivalent, malleable, rather than rigid. So if it really irritates you, one thing to do is, if you're trying to balance honoring the person and also asserting yourself, you can use an alliance. Someone that's close to tita, and that person can tell tita, when you say this to Roanne, she kind of feels embarrassed. So using an alliance, if that may help, because that person usually is seen as credible and trustworthy by the tita. Another thing is to use tita as your alliance, so you would be forming relationship with tita and know why that's hard for you. Tita, like we've actually tried to have a baby. of course, you use this if it feels good for you to share that information with Tita. So yeah, it's hard for me when someone asks me that question. So you kind of fortify that relationship to get Tita to understand that that's difficult for you. That's just one approach. Like I said, you could use an alliance. But for me, humor and some sarcasm usually works. And so I hope that's been helpful. So, what I want you to take away from this video is the art of responding. There's a lot of tension in our world now. It's either this way or that way. We could be malleable, we could meet somewhere in between. And also, to bring, I have mentioned this before, bring a thesaurus rather than a dictionary. Another person could not possibly use your own dictionary. That they could not find the exact words that works for you, because that's nearly impossible to expect. But when you bring a thesaurus, you are not deviating from the meaning of the work, but you're like, oh yeah, this is also what they mean. So widening your lens rather than narrowing it down. So that's the art of responding. I really hope is that you deepen your Filipino relationships, whether it's romantic, with a relative, with your mom, with your kuya. And I want to invite you, if you aren't receiving weekly love notes from me, and if you are interested, I would leave the link below. It's basically me writing you love notes on a weekly basis, something that I enjoy doing. It's quite personal and heartfelt. And for now, I'm wishing you well, and thanks for listening. Bye now.